Rain fell softly that night, whispering against the windows of a quiet suburban home. Inside, the only sound was the faint ticking of a wall clock, steady, almost mocking. Emma Lawson sat curled up on the sofa, her husband's phone glowing in her trembling hand. She hadn't meant to look. She was just checking the time, or at least that's what she told herself. But curiosity is a cruel thing. It doesn't knock before it enters your heart. Her thumb hovered over the screen. Then she opened the message. "Can't wait to see you again tonight. L." That one line shattered everything she thought she knew about her life. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. For a moment she couldn't breathe. It felt like someone had ripped the ground from beneath her feet. She stared around the room, the framed wedding photos, the flowers on the table, the scent of his cologne still hanging in the air. Every little thing mocked her. The life she had built, the trust she had guarded so fiercely. All of it was a lie. Her hands shook as she set the phone down. She wanted to scream, to throw something, to demand an explanation. But no sound came. She just sat there in the silence, her heartbeat loud and painful in her ears. When Daniel walked in a few minutes later, his smile was as easy as ever. He kissed her forehead and asked about dinner, completely unaware that the world between them had just ended. She nodded, answered softly, and smiled back. A small broken curve of her lips that hid a storm behind it. That night, Emma didn't cry. She didn't sleep. She sat awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain. Her mind replayed the message again and again until the pain hardened into something else. Something sharp. Something dangerous. By morning, her eyes were dry, her face calm, her voice steady. She looked at herself in the mirror and whispered almost tenderly, "He'll never do this to me again." And in that moment, something inside her changed forever. Because love can forgive almost anything. But betrayal awakens the part of us we never knew existed. So tell me, what would you do if the person you loved the most betrayed you in the cruelest way possible? The morning light poured softly through the kitchen window, washing everything in gold. Emma Lawson stood at the counter, stirring sugar into her husband's coffee. 2 spoons, no cream, just the way he liked it. The smell of toast filled the room, and the hum of the kettle blended with the faint murmur of the morning news. To anyone looking in, it was the picture of a perfect life, a loving wife, a devoted husband, a beautiful home built with years of care. Daniel walked in, dressed sharply for work, his tie perfectly knotted. He kissed Emma on the cheek and smiled, that same charming smile that once made her believe in forever. "Morning, love," he said, reaching for his coffee. His voice was calm, casual, ordinary, but Emma couldn't help noticing that he didn't look at her when he spoke. He was already scrolling through his phone, his brow furrowed, thumbs moving quickly. She smiled anyway. "You're going to be late," she said softly. "I've got a meeting," he replied, slipping his phone into his pocket. "Big client. Don't wait up tonight. Might run late." He said it without looking up. Emma nodded. She'd heard those words before, too many times lately. "Of course," she said, her voice light, steady. When the door closed behind him, the house fell silent again. She stood there for a long moment, staring at his half-empty cup, the steam fading into nothing. The silence felt heavy, like a secret pressing against the walls. The rest of the day passed in the rhythm of her usual routine. She met a client, picked out paint samples, arranged flowers in a vase. Everything neat, everything beautiful. Emma was known for her perfection, the woman who made other people's homes warm, harmonious, whole. But inside her own walls, something felt wrong. The colors seemed duller, the air colder. That evening, she set the table for 2, even though she knew he wouldn't come home on time. The clock ticked past 8, then 9, then 10. She reheated dinner once, then twice. Finally, she ate alone. When Daniel did walk in, hours later, he smelled faintly of perfume that wasn't hers, a sweet floral scent that clung to his collar. "Rough day?" she asked, forcing a small smile. He He loosened his tie and sighed. You could say that. You know how it is. She nodded again, her eyes searching his face for something. Guilt, regret, truth, but finding only tiredness. He kissed her forehead absently and headed upstairs to shower. Emma stood there, her hand gripping the edge of the table, her heart pounding in her chest. Upstairs, she could hear the water running. The phone he'd left behind on the counter buzzed once in a soft, short vibration. She froze. Her eyes went to the screen. One new message. Blob. I miss you already. Her breath hitched. Her stomach twisted. She didn't open it this time. She didn't need to. The truth was written clearly enough in those 4 words. The next morning, she woke early, made breakfast again, and smiled as if nothing had changed. When Daniel mentioned he'd be away for a conference next weekend, she simply nodded. You deserve a break, she said sweetly. He smiled back, relieved, maybe even proud of how understanding she was. He didn't notice the flicker in her eyes, the faint tightening of her jaw. Later, as she tidied the house, she caught her reflection in the mirror. For a moment, she didn't recognize the woman staring back. There was a coldness there, quiet, but unmistakable, like ice forming under still water. Her phone buzzed with a text from her friend Clara, asking if she and Daniel would join them for dinner. Emma typed back quickly, Daniel's busy again, maybe next time. She paused before hitting send, then smiled faintly. That night she sat alone on the couch flipping through an old photo album. Their wedding day, his hand on hers, their first apartment, their first Christmas. All those smiles, frozen moments of a love that once felt indestructible. But as she turned each page, she realized something painful. Daniel had been drifting away for months, maybe years, and she had been too afraid to see it. She had been painting over the cracks, pretending they weren't there, like one of her design projects covering flaws with color, hiding imperfections beneath decoration. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a slow erasure of her life. The rain started again outside, tapping against the window like soft footsteps. She looked toward the door where Daniel's coat still hung, the same one that smelled like someone else. Her jaw clenched, her eyes empty. That night she didn't cry. Instead, she made herself a cup of tea, sat at the table, and opened her notebook. She wrote a list, neat and precise, just as she did for her clients. But this list was different. At the top, she wrote, Things to fix. And beneath it, the first item read, Daniel. She closed the notebook, took a slow sip of tea, and whispered into the quiet room, No one lies to me and walks away. Outside, the rain fell harder, washing over the streets of Maple Drive. But inside that perfect little house, something darker had begun to grow. The next few days passed with an eerie calm. Daniel left early each morning, dressed in his usual dark suits, his cologne trailing behind him like a false promise. Emma watched him go from the kitchen window, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. She smiled when he waved, but her heart stayed still, not broken anymore, just hollow. That afternoon, she told him she had a client meeting across town. It wasn't true. Instead, she followed him. Her fingers gripped the steering wheel tightly as she drove a few cars behind, her pulse echoing in her ears. She'd never done something like this before, the kind of thing only desperate people in movies did. But betrayal changes everything. It turns soft hearts into weapons. Daniel parked outside a small cafe, not the fancy kind he usually took her to, but a quiet, tucked-away place. Through the window, Emma saw him. He wasn't alone. A young woman with long brown hair sat across from him, her smile bright, easy, familiar. Daniel reached across the table and touched her hand. They laughed, the kind of laugh he hadn't shared with Emma in years. Emma's hands began to tremble. Her vision blurred with tears, but she didn't look away. She sat there for nearly an hour, watching the two of them talk, laugh, and lean close, as if they were the only people in the world. When Daniel brushed a strand of hair from the woman's face and kissed her knuckles, something inside Emma broke completely. She didn't confront them. She didn't rush in. She simply drove away. Her eyes were red, her chest tight, but her mind was clear, frighteningly clear. She pulled into an empty parking lot and sat in silence. Then the tears came, quiet but endless. She pressed her forehead against the steering wheel and whispered, "Why wasn't I enough?" When the crying stopped, there was nothing left but exhaustion and clarity. That evening, her best friend Clara stopped by. Clara had known Emma since college. She was the only one Emma could trust with the truth. As they sat together on the couch, Emma told her everything. Clara's eyes widened. "Emma, you have to leave him. You can't stay after this." Emma smiled faintly, shaking her head. "Leave him? That's what he wants. He gets to destroy everything and walk away clean." "No, Clara, not this time." Clara looked at her uneasy. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Emma said softly, her tone almost calm, "he took my love, my trust, my life. I'll take something back." Clara reached for her hand. Listen to me. You're angry. You're hurt. But whatever you're thinking..." Emma cut her off with a quiet laugh that didn't sound like her own. "Don't worry. I'm not thinking, I'm planning." That night, Emma sat in her home office staring at the computer screen. The glow from the monitor lit her face as she typed words no one would ever expect from her. How to make someone disappear. Sleeping pills overdose signs. How long sedatives last. She clicked and scrolled, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat on the screen. She wasn't impulsive, she wasn't reckless. She was deliberate, the same way she designed her interiors with precision and control. The next morning she went to the pharmacy. Her explanation was simple. "Trouble sleeping lately?" The pharmacist smiled sympathetically as he handed her a small bottle of pills. Emma thanked him, tucking it into her purse. Her hand brushed against it several times on the way home, and each time she felt a strange comfort, as if control was finally returning to her. At home, she hid the bottle in a small box behind her art supplies. She didn't know yet what she would do, only that she would do something. The thought both terrified and steadied her. Over the next few days, she observed Daniel like an outsider studying a stranger. His excuses, his late-night phone calls, his faint guilt disguised as charm, all of it became patterns she could predict. She noticed how he looked at his phone before bed, how he smiled at messages he didn't want her to see. He had no idea she was already watching, already waiting. One evening, as they sat down for dinner, Daniel glanced at his phone and frowned. "Work again?" Emma asked lightly. "Yeah," he said quickly. "Client issue." She nodded, her smile practiced. "You work so hard. I'm lucky to have you." He looked up at her then, almost suspiciously, as if sensing something off. "You're being extra sweet tonight," he said with a grin. "Just appreciating my husband," she replied, her voice smooth. "We don't do that enough, do we?" He chuckled, relaxed again, and returned to his phone. That night, Emma opened her notebook again. On the page titled, "Things to Fix," she crossed out Daniel. In its place, she wrote one new word in steady handwriting. Justice. She stared at the word for a long time. Justice. Maybe she wasn't a victim anymore. Maybe she was something else now. Something stronger, colder, freer. She turned off the light and lay beside him in bed. Daniel was already asleep, his breathing steady, peaceful. She studied his face, the face she once loved more than anything. He looked innocent when he slept, the cruelest illusion of all. She whispered quietly into the dark, her lips close to his ear. "You have no idea what's coming." And in the silence that followed, she made her decision. Love had died, but something much darker had taken its place. Days slipped by with the same careful choreography Emma had always relied on. Meals timed, smiles practiced, laughter measured. Outwardly, the house hummed with ordinary life. A vase of peonies on the table, a playlist of soft jazz in the background, the faint smell of lemon oil that Emma used to polish the floorboards. Inside her, however, everything had rearranged itself. Where love had once lived, there was now a calculated stillness, a patient, iron-edged clarity. She moved through their days like an actor performing a role she had perfected. When Daniel returned from work, she greeted him with warmth that felt like a mask pressed tightly to her face. She asked about his day, listened to his stories, laughed in the right places. She set out his shirts, ironed them with the same care she once took to smooth the creases out of his dreams. He noticed the attention, commented on it even, with a pleased smile that only hardened her resolve. The more he relaxed into the routine, the more secure she felt that her plan was possible. Emma's planning was not a feverish frenzy but a series of small, meticulous choices. She cataloged Daniel's habits in a notebook the way she did for clients. What he drank, when he fell asleep, his tolerance for alcohol, the locks on the house, the placement of their smoke alarms. She studied the layout of their home until it felt like a second skin. The low cupboard beneath the sink, the narrow space behind the boiler, the garden gate that creaked when pushed too quickly. Each detail became a tiny gear in a larger mechanism she was assembling. She practiced her expressions in the mirror, grief, shock, bewilderment, until they were indistinguishable from truth. She rehearsed phone calls in her head, the conversations she might have with neighbors, the words she would offer to the police. She drafted a plausible timeline. The time Daniel left the house where he could have been, the point at which she would discover him. She wrote letters she never intended to send, notes to herself that read like evidence. The notebook, once a place for sketches and color palettes, grew dense with inked maps and schedules. At the store, she chose ingredients with a designer's eye. Creamy brie, the exact grapes he favored, a bottle of wine with a label he would admire but not scrutinize. She practiced the casual way she would pour the wine, steady, confident, studying the flicker of reflection on glass, the slow curl of the liquid surface. She picked a playlist of old songs that had once been theirs, melodies that would become a haunting underline to a night that pretended to be ordinary. There were moments when the plan felt monstrously final, and Emma recoiled from it. In the quiet of the bathroom, she sometimes saw flashes of the woman she had been. The laughter on their honeymoon, the clumsy way he had proposed, the small handmade card he had given her when she landed her first major client. Those memories arrived like ghosts, and for a second she allowed herself to grieve the life that had been. Then she breathed, pressed her palms to the sink, and let the grief harden into focus. The tenderness was a luxury she could not afford. Sentiment was the enemy of precision. She kept Clara close without revealing the truth. They met for coffee twice a week, and Emma wielded the rehearsed version of her pain like a shield and a lure. Clara offered platitudes, outrage, and occasionally the blunt encouragement to leave. Emma nodded, accepted sympathy, and let the conversation slip into the file of her performance. Clara's compassion made Emma's facade easier to sustain. It also deepened the ease with which she could pretend. Pretending, she discovered, was an art, and Emma was an artist again. When the night she had planned arrived, the house glittered in the way a stage does moments before the curtain rises. Candles burned in glass votives, their flames small and steady. The table was set with the plates he preferred, the silver flattened and shining, napkins folded into precise fans. The jazz playlist hummed in the background, and the scent of rosemary filled the air. Emma had prepared the meal herself, recipe cards hidden in her head, movements practiced until muscle memory took over. There was a part of her that took a bleak, private pleasure in the symmetry of it all, creating beauty even as she unmade the life around it. Daniel arrived home early, flushed and surprised. He kissed her awkwardly at the door, the way one might kiss someone they care for but never truly see anymore. "This is a surprise," he said, genuinely pleased. Emma laughed lightly and led him to the table. They ate, they spoke, they traded small jokes. He reached across the table for her hand, and she allowed him a second of closeness. Enough to make the scene believable, not enough to soften her. After dessert, she poured him more wine than usual. His shoulders loosened, his voice gained the lazy confidence of a man who felt no threat. He apologized in an abstract way. "I know I've been distant," he said, without remembering the depth of his offense, without the weight of the words he had sent another woman. Emma accepted his apology the way one accepts a dress at a fitting, to be altered later if needed. She listened, her eyes glinting with a gentleness that was all performance. The conversation dwindled into comfortable silence. They moved from the table to the sofa. Emma's hand brushed his as she reached for the remote. He didn't notice. She thought of the bottle tucked away in her studio, of how small it was, how ordinary, something that could be explained away as medicine for insomnia, no more suspicious than a vitamin. She thought of the way he smelled of her and of someone else, of the casualness of betrayal that had been folded into their ordinary life. When he rose to refill his glass, she followed him into the kitchen with a grace that belied the churning within. She handed him the wine without hesitation. He toasted the soft light, the music, the illusion of reconciliation, and drank. She watched him closely, memorizing the tilt of his head, the way the wine caught the lamplight. When he smiled and said, "To us," it sounded like both a question and an answer. Emma smiled back and raised her glass. For a moment she considered walking away right then, leaving behind the stage table, the soft music, the question of what justice deserved. But the decision had already settled in her chest with a weight that did not budge. She thought of every small cruelty, every dismissal, every time she had swallowed the sharpest part of herself to keep the peace. She thought of the art studio she'd remade in neat rows, the empty couch in the front room, the echo of laughter that had once filled the house. None of it mattered now in the way it had before. She returned to the table and sat, keeping her hands folded so they would not betray her. The pretended calm wrapped around her like a cloak. She let him relax into the evening, let him feel safe. In the quiet, she made sure every last piece of evidence, every scrap that could point suspicion toward her, would be accounted for, staged, and explained. When the night finally wound down, she saw him stumble to bed, kissed him lightly on the forehead, and watched the easy rise and fall of his chest as sleep took hold. Alone, she gathered the empty plates, the candle stubs, the napkins. Her hands moved with the same precision she used to arrange cutlery in a drawer. She wiped down the surfaces, scrubbed away fingerprints that might betray nervousness, and returned the bottle to its hiding place as if nothing had happened. Outside, the world was ordinary. The distant bark of a dog, the low murmur of a late radio. Inside, Emma sat very still in the dark, feeling the plan settle into place like a stone in water. The surface smoothed out, but the ripples would go on forever. The morning after our anniversary, I woke up tied to a chair. The dim light of the basement, the smell of dust and paint. This wasn't our bedroom. Panic flared. "Emma?" My voice cracked. "What the hell is this?" She emerged from the shadows, calm, holding 2 cups of coffee as if it were any other Sunday. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice steady. "Emma, untie me," I pleaded. "This isn't funny." She tilted her head. "You think I'm joking? You mean like pretending to work late every night while you were with your assistant?" The blood drained from my face. I tried to explain, to apologize, but she just circled me, her voice a low, cold whisper. "I gave you everything, every dream, every piece of myself, and you threw it away." She placed a handwritten confession in front of me. My confession. It detailed everything, ending with a line that made my heart stop. "I can't live with the shame." "No one will believe this," I choked out. She leaned in, her eyes burning into mine. "They will, because you're going to sign it. You're going to make it right." "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet again. He looked up, eyes wet. "Now let me go." She hesitated. "I will," she said finally. "But first I want you to understand something." She stepped closer, kneeling so their faces were inches apart. "This wasn't just about you cheating. It was about you taking away who I was. Every lie you told made me smaller. You broke me piece by piece until there was nothing left but the part that could do this." Daniel's voice was barely a whisper. "You're not a killer, Emma." She smiled faintly, sadness flickering behind her eyes. "No, I'm an artist. And this is my last piece." She untied the knots around his wrists slowly, gently. He flinched, expecting her to strike. She didn't. She walked away, setting the envelope on the workbench. "Go upstairs," she said without looking back. "It's over." Daniel stood, rubbing his wrists. He hesitated, watching her. For a brief second, he thought maybe she had changed her mind. Maybe she was still the woman he'd married. He moved toward the stairs, his voice shaking. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I know," she said softly. As he reached the first step, she turned away. Her eyes fell on the drawer she had left half open. Inside, the gun gleamed faintly under the low light. His gun, the one he kept locked away. She heard him pause at the top of the stairs. The silence stretched. Then one single sound cut through it. A gunshot. The echo filled the house, sharp and final. Emma didn't flinch. She stood there, eyes closed, breathing slowly. A single tear slipped down her cheek. When she finally opened her eyes, the world seemed quieter than it had ever been. Minutes later, the distant wail of sirens began to grow closer, their red lights painting the walls in flickering shadows. Emma walked upstairs calmly and sat on the front porch, rain starting to fall again, washing the blood from the wooden steps. By the time the police arrived, she was sitting still, hands folded in her lap. When the officer asked what had happened, she looked up, her expression composed, voice soft. He couldn't live with what he'd done, and she said it with such sincerity, such calm conviction, that not even the rain dared to argue. The rain hadn't stopped in 3 days. It fell in a steady rhythm, soft, endless, almost soothing, as if the sky itself mourned what had happened inside that house. The flashing lights were long gone, the tape taken down, and yet the scent of tragedy still lingered, faint but impossible to ignore. Emma sat by the living room window, a cup of tea cooling in her hands. The house was too quiet now, the kind of silence that felt alive, heavy with ghosts. Every sound, the creak of the floorboards, the ticking of the clock, seemed louder, sharper. The world outside went on, oblivious, but inside time had fractured into a before and an after. The police had come and gone. They'd asked their questions, taken their notes, offered their condolences. A detective, a man with kind eyes and a voice that tried too hard to be gentle, told her she was very brave. He said Daniel's suicide note made everything clear, that sometimes guilt consumes a man faster than anyone can save him. Emma had nodded, her expression appropriately dazed, her voice soft but steady. She'd played the role perfectly. The grieving widow, the shocked wife who never saw it coming. And in a way, that part wasn't an act. She was grieving, not just for Daniel, but for the version of herself she'd buried alongside him. For the first time in years, the house belonged to her alone. She wandered through the rooms slowly, touching the furniture, the photographs, the little things that once made up their life. On the mantel sat their wedding picture, Daniel laughing, her hand in his, sunlight falling across their faces. She stared at it for a long time, then picked it up and turned it face down. She didn't need to see their smiles anymore. Days turned into weeks. The funeral came and went, a blur of black umbrellas, murmured prayers, and sympathetic faces that melted into one another. People hugged her, whispered how strong she was, how time heals everything. She thanked them all politely. But time didn't heal. It simply dulled the edges until the pain became part of the background, like static on an old radio. Every night Emma would lie awake listening to the rain, just as she had that first night after discovering the truth. But now, there was no rage, no trembling, only calm. A deep, chilling calm that settled into her bones. She'd started painting again, something she hadn't done in years. Her studio, once filled with dust and neglect, now bloomed with color. Canvases leaned against every wall, each one darker and more haunting than the last. One painting stood out from the rest, a silhouette of a man standing in the rain, his reflection in a pool of red. It was beautiful and terrible all at once, the kind of painting that made people stop and stare, unsure if they wanted to understand it. Art critics would later call it a raw portrayal of grief and redemption. They'd never know what it truly was. One evening, as she was cleaning her brushes, there was a knock at the door. When she opened it, she found Detective Harris standing there, hat in hand, rain dripping from his coat. "Mrs. Lawson," he said softly, "I'm sorry to bother you again." She smiled faintly. "It's all right, Detective. Please come in." He stepped inside, glancing around the tidy living room. The smell of turpentine and oil paint hung faintly in the air. "I just had a few follow-up questions," he said. "Of course," she replied, motioning toward the sofa. He didn't sit. Instead, he studied her face for a moment. "You've been through a lot," he said. "Losing a spouse like that, it's never easy." Emma's eyes softened. "No, it isn't." He hesitated, pulling a small notebook from his pocket. "There's just one thing that's been bothering me." Her heart skipped, but her face didn't change. "Oh?" "The gun," he said quietly. "You said it was his, locked in the drawer of his desk." "That's right. We didn't find any fingerprints on it." She smiled faintly. "He used to clean it often. He said it made him feel responsible." Harris studied her for a long moment, then closed his notebook. "I see. Well, it doesn't change much. The evidence is clear." "Then why are you still asking?" she asked gently. He met her gaze. "Because something about this case feels too neat, too perfect." A small laugh escaped her. "Maybe Daniel planned it that way. He was always very careful about appearances." The detective's eyes lingered on her for another moment before softening. "You're probably right. I'm sorry to trouble you." "No trouble at all." He nodded and walked toward the door. As he stepped out into the rain, she called after him. "Detective?" He turned back. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the truth isn't what we want it to be. Sometimes we have to let it go. For everyone's sake." He studied her for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Take care of yourself, Mrs. Lawson." When the door closed, Emma exhaled slowly. She stood there for a long time, listening to the rain tapping against the windows again. Later that night, she took the envelope, the one with Daniel X's confession, from her drawer, and held it over a candle flame. The paper curled, darkened, then turned to ash. When the last piece fell, she whispered, "Now it's really over." The following week, a letter arrived from a gallery in New York. They wanted to feature her paintings, the ones that capture the beauty and sorrow. The irony almost made her smile. At the exhibition months later, people crowded around her work. Critics whispered words like masterpiece and emotionally charged when hauntingly human. Emma walked through the room quietly, dressed in black, her hair swept up elegantly. When someone asked what inspired her latest collection, she smiled softly and said, "Loss teaches us who we are. Sometimes it frees us." That night, as she returned home to her quiet house, the moonlight spilling across the floor, she paused at the top of the basement stairs. The faint scent of paint still lingered there, and something else, something metallic and distant. She stood for a long time, staring down into the shadows. Then she closed the door gently and turned the key in the lock. Outside, the rain began to fall again, soft, relentless, eternal. Emma sat by the window, watching it trace silver lines down the glass. For the first time in a long while, she smiled. Not out of joy, not out of peace, but out of understanding. Some stories don't end with forgiveness. Some end with quiet. And that quiet, for Emma Lawson, was the sweetest sound she'd ever known. If this story gripped you, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell icon for more haunting, true crime-inspired stories. Leave a comment below. Do you think justice was served? Or did Emma go too far? Your thoughts could shape our next episode.